Okay. Okie dokie.
Are we rolling?
Dive right in.
Yeah, I'm
Cool.
good.
What's going on, everybody? Sam Heine here, back with another episode of Street Talk. Hope everybody's staying healthy out there. I'm sitting in an old mill building with Natalie Officer today. She is the principal designer and owner of Natalie O Design. We're in her office space right now in this lofty mill type of setup.
Yeah.
And she's an interior designer around town, residential and commercial. And I see you doing a lot of cool work around town, and so I wanted to check in and see how everything's going amidst all this craziness in the world right now.
It is optimal craziness for sure. It's hitting us pretty hard, and I think it's hitting a lot of people in the same way. It's kind of, I've been describing it as a emotional treadmill. You get on, you turn it on, you start running, but you're not actually going anywhere.
Yeah, I'm going to use that.
So the driver in us, the people who, creatives like to drive things and create and perpetuate beauty, and it's just finding different ways to do it.
Yeah.
You know, right now, being more innovative than we maybe were comfortable with before.
Yeah.
We just have to keep going.
Yeah,
So,
I guess a lot of people are having to step back and think of new ways to go about their day-to-day, right? So, figuring out a way to integrate technology into the game plan. You can't be in front of as many people, which I know hurts because you're doing such a tangible service for people.
And for us, homes and real estate are very intimate. You think about the fact that someone is inviting you into their home. It is literally the most sacred place that they own outside of that plot in the grave one day, I suppose. But really, they really tend to it, and you really are honored to come into their space that they pay for, that where they feed their people, where they love their people. So for us being, I guess, shut out of those experiences, it's definitely a really, really challenging thing to do. And we weren't in the past particularly tech forward because everything really was hand and feel and, using other senses. So to limit it now to sight and sound is a little bit harder. But, I think if creatives can't be innovative, then we're in trouble.
Right.
So.
No, 100%. I recently just had an experience moving from one place to another, a living space for myself. And I think the one before was I treated it almost like a crash pad. And then the place I was moving to was more of a permanent type of situation. And so I put a little bit more into the decor. And I swear it's like night and day. I didn't bother with any colors in the first one, but it like the feeling of it, I guess what you said about an intimate living space, being comfortable in it, being inspired in your living space. So I guess that's a really cool thing to play a part of in your role, right?
Well, this is maybe far-reaching for some. We're trying to keep our distance, so I'm not turning into you.
Yeah, 6 feet here.
We're
folks.
trying, give or take.
Yeah.
But I think the word essential is being really magnified right now. Everybody's really magnifying that word in a way that maybe is unfair because it's not a judgment. It's rather just kind of what we have to do right now. But I think for the creative, of course, we see design as essential. But when you think about someone's mental health and how they live in their space, there really is a tandem dance there. And it can really improve someone's living experience. And while resources are limited right now, the time and appreciation spent in people's home is so amplified that every wall is being looked at, every window shade. People are really magnifying their space in a way that they hadn't before.
Yeah.
And so I do get a lot of calls about that. I do get a lot of Instagram and Facebook messages about like, what can I do, you know?
Yeah.
And so we know that we're essential in that way, and we look forward to being able to fully explore that again at some point.
Yeah,
so
people are probably looking a little bit closer at corners they've never even looked at in their house. Like,
they're finding corners
Yeah.
they didn't know existed.
Yeah.
There are moms across the city right now hiding in a corner
Yeah.
because homeschool is still happening.
Right.
And I happen to have broken out of school
Yeah.
to come do this. And so, yeah, those corners are definitely being explored. And garden rooms or garage spaces or spare bedrooms are turning into offices. Getting, you know, paint jobs, that paint that was sitting in the basement for the last 4 years is being used. So the utilization model is drastically changing right now. Yeah.
Well, here's a question for you, because you do the commercial and the residential side. What's an approach, I guess, what's the approach, residential versus commercial, when you're working with a client? I guess in a lot of ways they're the same, because whether it's a living space or whether you're creating a space for a client or a customer, you want them to feel comfortable and inspired in one way or another. But what's the approach that you've taken with your model
That works?
that works?
So for people who are watching at home, just to use reference in spaces you may have been into, we supported the design at Please and Thank You on Floyd Street, and then also on Market Street. And then we also just completed last year the Story experience, which is down at 900 East Main, next to Biscuit Valley.
That's a great one.
So in both of those, if you can put those two kind of visually in your sites, what you'll see that's been our model is that you have to have something that is familiar, shapes that are familiar, and maybe even materials that are familiar to people. In Please and Thank You, we used vintage recycled tile in colors and shapes that people were familiar with. The same with the bowling chairs. You know, Brooke had those. I think she either bought them or had them for a bit and wanted to incorporate them. And people can, all generations can relate to that. And that is a commercial site, obviously. But then also at Story, this was a location we wanted to feel international. We wanted it to feel like something that you could get off your plane, come into the city, sit down and have a meeting, and think, am I in New York? Am I in Chicago? This wallpaper looks like something from Brazil. You know, we wanted everyone to have something that they could relate to. So the mix is really the important thing. And people do that at home too. So something modern next to something maybe more traditional, that's really what makes us, that's our story, right? So expressing the story that other people can read, visualize, or incorporate into their I guess what makes them feel welcome, you know?
Yeah,
so.
Interesting. And I guess it's different depending on what the tastes are of who you're working with. But in my business, you know, I walk through a lot of emptier spaces or transitioning spaces from one hand to the next, whether it's commercial or residential. And I think people think a little too far into, or can get caught in the trap of thinking too far into walking into a space and it's not done up and they haven't put their personal touch on it, and they might write it off because it doesn't have this, that, or the other thing. It's the wrong color. You know, how do you size up maybe a raw space, you know, and turn the corner for a client that you're working with, you know, color-wise, taking a wall out, something like that, just trying to see through that initial identity and painting the picture of what it could be?
You know, I think we all, even myself who tries to avoid it, there's an HGTV mindset where you, okay, put it into a program, move the wall, do this, and now someone will see the potential. Very rarely, in reality, do people want to invest a lot of money in seeing the potential. So they do weigh on us to say, do you see it? Is there possibility here? And we're very humbled to be brought into that process. But what I try to do with people is pull them out to 30,000 feet and say, okay, you know, this space is going to transform completely when we take off the window treatments, when you put on a coat of paint, or let's look at it as if there are no parameters. So just look at the outside walls and the bone structure of this place, and let's go from there. And then, you know, how far is the bone structure from the financial structure that's going to support it?
Yeah.
And if that gap is too wide, then it's not the right property.
Right.
But if we can look at the bone structure and amend it in incremental percentages and move the delta together, then we usually have a pretty good space.
Right.
But the gap sometimes is too big and it's the
Yeah.
wrong fit.
Such an important way to reframe it, just breaking it down to the bone structure, you know, because it really is like sometimes it just needs a coat of paint, or sometimes a wall is easier to take out than other walls might be, or, you know, throwing a cool light fixture up or something like that can just totally do a place up in a really cool way that changes it.
You know, like many small businesses, we are admittedly in transition here, and we are fighting very hard to hold on to the space that we're even sitting in. But this space specifically, when we came in, was very dark, maroons, greens, a lot of black. So, you know, you play off the windows, you play off what the space does for you, and then you really give it colors that you can communicate with as a person. So, yeah, it's you never want to walk away from something because of a paint color.
Right.
That's for sure.
Right. Do you feel like, you know, I always feel like a natural light and big lofty spaces to me are really inspiring, and especially something that holds a story like an old mill building like we're sitting in, and then being in, you know, thrown in the mix that we're in Germantown on the Shelby Park line. You know, there's a lot of transitions going on, a lot of progression. Is that something in general, you know, maybe it translates to someplace up in Irish Hill for somebody that's looking for a house or a business? Is that something that inspired you in your creative process, being I guess, in that mix day to day?
Yeah, yes. You know, we moved here from Chicago, and I grew up in Indiana. I'm very loyal to this region, and the people are good. It's just a community of really, really good people. But when we moved to Louisville, my biggest challenge being here was that it's very segregated.
Yeah.
It's segregated in a way that is extremely uncomfortable to me. And if it's not uncomfortable to people, then they're not seeing it. And it's a real hard challenge for me. So we don't live down here. And when we were looking for properties, it was absolutely imperative to me. And part of my fight to hold on to this space is that I want to be part of a solution for this space. I want to be part of a solution for the segregation problem, whether it is racially segregated or financially segregated. I want to be part of that solution always. And so creating work or being part of an ecosystem here in Shelby Park or Germantown or whatever we're calling it, that utilizes these coffee shops and that paint shop and the labor force in this area is really important to me.
Yeah.
It's really, really important to me. By nature, if we're not driving positive change in the community, then I feel like we're just, you know, you're dialed down to the bare bones of design, which I love design, but I do think that you can have a social impact with wherever you choose to plant your seed.
Totally, yeah. Kind of the best of both worlds and keeping that big picture in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This space specifically is it's really at a crossroads of Germantown and Smoketown and Shelby Park. And these windows, by nature, we're all plants, right? We all lean into the light.
Yeah.
And so there's a healthy part of that. There's activity outside of this window all the time. Sometimes there are things that are not favorable, right? And so you have to be okay with the fact that there are going to be unfavorable things happening in transition.
Yeah.
And if you are not comfortable with that, closing yourself off from those areas is probably fine. But I think there's a lot of people who lean into that discomfort and want to be part of the light and the water and the soil that help change it.
Totally, yeah. So. I feel like, putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations, for me, I guess in different scenarios in my life, have always led to the biggest changes or happenings of growth. So yeah, I resonate with what you just said. I think that's cool.
I mean, when we moved in here, we've been here almost 4 years. We started out in the broom closet. Wow. Down the hall.
Humble beginnings.
Well, the UPS guy always says, are you still working in the broom closet? And I'm like, thanks, man. Thanks for the reminder. Nothing like keeping it really real.
Right.
As we contemplate all of our shrink and flow to survive. But, Paristown Point was not here. The building across the street being renovated is new for us. There was no Full Stop coffee shop. Yeah. I think that...
what was the year that you moved to this building?
I moved in 4 years ago, so 2016 we moved here. And this building, actually, if you're not familiar with the Hope Mills building, the landlords bought this building, I believe, in 1989. And it has been a community of artists and creatives all of that time. And for a large portion of that, the rent was held quite flat. Because there was such a belief in the creative element. So there's core gallery in this building. There are probably no fewer than 20 different artists or artisans who inhabit the stretch of this building between Kentucky and Swan Street. Yeah. So it's on that corner, and it's an ecosystem of acceptance and creativity and collaboration all day long.
Such a cool story too, because when you look at the ceilings, the wood, if you looked up 100 years ago, it would look much the same, maybe minus a paint job. But the fact that it sort of went from blue collar working space, where a lot of the people around this neighborhood worked in the mills around this. This was the mill district.
It was a denim mill. It was a worsted denim essentially.
And just to kind of see it. It's like a beehive of art studios and design forward vision. That's pretty cool. Cool thing to be a part of. It's inspiring.
Yeah, it's huge for us, and it has been a huge benefit. I think sometimes people forget when they're looking at real estate outside of the brick and the mortar, what's the yield? And the yield for us creatively has been exponential. So I'm really thankful to have been part of this location now, and hopefully, as things unfold, the future.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. Is there a project coming up that you're particularly inspired by on the residential or commercial side? I know you can't disclose necessarily.
I can disclose a lot. There are a lot fewer rules right now for everybody.
Things are a little more lax, right?
Yeah, everybody's in this together ultimately. So the survival of all of us in different ways, I think giving oxygen to the projects, giving air to the projects is probably more beneficial than keeping things closed.
Yeah.
Yes, we do have residences. We are working on a home in Cherokee, off Cherokee Park, of course, and then a home in Cincinnati, because very important that we, as the designer base grows in Louisville, spreading out and taking your craft more globally is really, really important. I'm not the designer for everyone, and so it's important to know that. And after 12 years, people are seeking us out for the style that we utilize, awesome. which is lovely and comfortable. So those continue to grow. But one of the big projects that we can't super disclose, but there's a lot of activity going on Broadway. There's a lot of new development happening on Broadway, and for me, it is a main artery of this city that really serves as a bridge, and one that if we close the gap between Smoketown and Russell, then we have really created an area where a lot of community can really, really be there. And there's a lot of work to be done because it's a bunch of parking lots. Yeah. But I do think that this virtual push of us all being, at home or learning how to use technology and those kind of things, we're going to have less need for parking lots and more need for community connection. And so we're really lending our efforts there as much as possible. The groups that have brought us in are diverse in nature, meaning out of state investors, people who are really, really rooted in supporting the growth of Russell. And so to come to that table and be trusted as an outsider, I guess, is really probably the biggest gift of 2020 to date, because there's a lot of 2020 that's not feeling comfortable. But for us, that's a silver lining. That means we're being heard, that people know who we are. Our heart's intention is being absorbed in all groups of people, and it's just a really high honor to be engaged there.
That's awesome. What a cool project. Well, cool.
The project I'm not telling you about that I'm telling you about.
Okay. Little hint there.
Absolutely.
Well, cool. Well, it sounds like some cool projects are on the horizon, and really cool story, and cool space you're filling it out in, and appreciate you coming on and telling us more about it.
I appreciate being asked, especially right now, so thank you.
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
much.
All right, folks. See you next time.
Thanks.